The PDH Pod podcast is a great source of PDH news, tips, and tricks, so don't forget to check it out. It is available on this channel and almost anywhere you find podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe for more PDH content, and like this video. It really helps us out with the YouTube algorithm and doesn't cost you anything. Now let's get started. Lobert is going first and is playing Flametongue Kavu, a 4/2 for 3 and a red, with when Flametongue Kavu enters the battlefield, it deals 4 damage to target creature. Going second is Infamous Fridge, whose commander is Prava of the Steel Legion, a 1/4 legendary cat soldier for 2 and a white with, as long as it's your turn, creature tokens you control get +1/+4, and an activated ability that costs 3 and a white to create a 1/1 white soldier creature token, and partner, with the chosen partner of Nadier, Agent of the Duskanel, a 3/3 legendary elf warrior for 5 and a black with, when a token you control leaves the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on Nadier, Agent of Duskanel, and when Nadier leaves the battlefield, create a number of 1/1 elf warrior creature tokens equal to its power. It, of course, also has partner. Brad Drac V is going third with Resolute Blademaster, a 2/2 human soldier ally for 3, a red, and a white with Rally. Whenever Resolute Blademaster or another ally enters the battlefield under your control, creature tokens you control gain double strike until end of turn. And going last is Derek, who is on Brazen Upstart, a 4/2 elf shaman for a red, green, and a white with Vigilance. And when Brazen Upstart dies, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Brad mulligans, but keeps his second hand. Everyone else keeps their starting 7. Lobert starts the game with a snow-covered mountain and passes. Infamous Fridge plays Obscura Storefront, which sacrifices itself when it enters the battlefield and allows Infamous Fridge to put a plains into play from his deck, tapped, gain a life, and shuffle. Brad starts his turn, plays an Evolving Wilds, sacrifices to put a plains from his deck into play, tapped, and passes. Derek also uses an Evolving Wilds to put a plains into play and ends his turn. Lobert plays a snow-covered mountain, casts a Mind Stone, and passes. Infamous Fridge plays a swamp and ends his turn. Brad plays a mountain, Wayfarer's Bauble, and passes. Derek puts a tapped Arctic Tree Line into play on his turn. Lobert starts his turn, plays his third snow-covered mountain, taps everything to play Sisay's Ring, and passes. Infamous Fridge plays a plains and taps out for one of his commanders, Prava of the Steel Legion. Brad untaps, draws, and sacrifices Wayfarer's Bauble to put a mountain from his deck into play tapped. Derek cycles Ash Barrens to put a forest into his hand in Brad's end step. Derek then begins his turn, puts the forest into play, casts a Viridian Emissary, Lone Dryad, and ends his turn. Lobert untaps, casts Pristine Talisman, and uses it to play Magnifying Glass, so he gains a life. He then cycles Smoldering Crater to draw a card, plays Cave of Temptation, and passes. Infamous Fridge plays Urza's Power Plant as his land for turn and casts the adventure part of Lonesome Unicorn, which puts a 2/2 knight creature token with Vigilance into play. Brad begins his turn, casts a Bonder's Ornament, and passes. Derek pays a red for Goblin Chirurgeon, which he taps along with Loam Dryad to make a red. He uses that red, a plains, and a forest to play his commander, Brazen Upstart. He uses his last land to play Benevolent Bodyguard and calls that a turn. Lobert casts his commander, Flametongue Kavu, using Pristine Talisman so he gains another life and targets Prava with the Kavu's ability to deal 4 damage to it. Infamous Fridge responds with Professor's Warning, targeting Prava with the mode that makes it indestructible until end of turn. After that, Lobert plays Galvanic Relay, which exiles Fractured Power Stone, Fireball, and Felwar Stone. Infamous Fridge starts his turn and casts Revitalize to gain 3 life and draw a card. He plays Desert of the Glorified tapped, casts Carrion Feeder, and attacks Brad with his Vigilant 3/6 Knight token. Brad untaps, draws, pays 2 to suspend Gargadon with 4 time counters on it, and casts Recommission, targeting the Wayfarer's Bauble in his graveyard to return it to the battlefield. Derek begins his turn, plays Command Tower, and goes to combat, attacking Infamous Fridge with Brazen Upstart. Infamous Fridge does not block and takes 4 commander damage. After combat, Derek casts Explore, which draws a card and allows him to play another land for turn, so he puts a plains into play. Derek passes. Lobert untaps, plays a snow-covered mountain, and passes. In his end step, Infamous Fridge cycles a Secluded Step. Infamous Fridge then starts his turn, plays a Skinwing, which creates a Germ token and equips itself to it, making it a 2/2 with flying. He uses his last plains to cast Sacred Cat, and attacks Brad with his Knight token again. Brad takes 3, and Infamous Fridge ends his turn. Brad starts his turn by removing a time counter from Gargadon. On his first main phase, he plays Blitz Automaton for its prototype cost, making it a 3/2 with haste. He then attacks Lobert, who blocks with his 4/2 commander. Both creatures die. Brad passes. On his end step, Derek plays Ambush Paratrooper. Derek untaps and attacks Infamous Fridge with his 4/2 commander. Fridge blocks with his 1/1 Sacred Cat. The cat dies, and Fridge gains 1 from the lifelink. Post-combat, Derek taps 3 creatures and 2 land to cast Conclave Phalanx, using its Convoke ability. When it enters, he gains a life for each creature he controls, 7, and passes. On his end step, Lobert taps 4 to activate Magnifying Glass to make a clue and gain 1 life off of Pristine Talisman. He pays 2 more to sacrifice the clue to draw a card. Lobert then untaps, draws for turn, and pays 6 for Flametongue Kavu. He gains 1 off of Pristine Talisman and targets Prava with the Kavu's ability again. Infamous Fridge responds by sacrificing it to Carrion Feeder to put a +1/+1 counter on it. Infamous Fridge casts a Mana Geode in his first main phase, which lets him scry 1. He keeps the card on top. Next, he casts Inkling Summoning, which creates a 2/1 Inkling token with flying. He ends his turn. Brad removes a counter from Gargadon, draws, plays a Path of Ancestry, and sacrifices Wayfarer's Bauble to search his deck for a plains and put it into play tapped. Eric begins his turn and goes to combat, attacking Infamous Fridge with the 1/2 Ambush Paratrooper with flying and his commander. Infamous blocks the Paratrooper with his 2/2 Germ with flying. Derek pays 5 to activate the Paratrooper's ability, which gives his creatures +1/+1 until end of turn. Lobert responds by casting Fiery Cannonade to deal 2 damage to each creature. Derek responds to that by sacrificing Benevolent Bodyguard to give Brazen Upstart protection from red, and also sacrifices Goblin Chirurgeon to regenerate the Paratrooper. Infamous Fridge sacrifices the Germ, Night Token, and Inkling to put another 3 counters on Carrion Feeder. The Fiery Cannonade resolves, which kills Viridian Emissary and Flametongue Kavu. Derek uses Viridian Emissary's Death Trigger to put a mountain into play tapped from his deck. Brazen Upstart deals 5 commander damage to Infamous Fridge, and Derek passes. Lobert untaps, draws, and calls that a turn. Infamous Fridge plays an Urza's Mine and plays Nadir, Agent of the Duskanel. He attacks Derek with a 5/5 Carrion Feeder. Derek blocks with Brazen Upstart. Upstart dies and triggers. Derek chooses not to put it into the command zone and looks at the top 5 cards of his deck, puts a Militia Burglar into his hand, and puts the rest on the bottom in any order. Infamous Fridge ends his turn. Brad removes a counter from his Gargadon, puts a mountain into play, casts Raid Bombardment and Tavern Brawler. Derek starts his turn and casts Recommission, targeting Brazen Upstart. He puts it back on the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter and casts Militia Burglar, which lets him look at the top 4 cards of his deck and put a creature with power 2 or less into his hand. He reveals Tethmost High Priest and goes to combat, attacking Lobert for 1. Lobert kills the Paratrooper with a lightning bolt. Derek passes. In his end step, Lobert pays 6 to create another clue and sacrifice it to draw. He gains 1 from Pristine Talisman. Lobert untaps for turn and passes. Infamous Fridge plays Nested Shambler and pays 6 to equip it with Skinwing. Next, he attacks Derek with a 5/5 Carrion Feeder. Derek blocks with a 5/3 Brazen Upstart. Infamous Fridge sacrifices Nested Shambler to Carrion Feeder, make it a 6/6, and make 3 squirrels. Brazen Upstart goes back to the command zone and puts Kassaling Pride Mage into Derek's hand. Brad starts his turn and removes the last counter from Gargadon, so he casts it for free, and it gains haste. He then draws for turn, plays a mountain, and casts his commander, Resolute Blademaster. Resolute Blademaster gives his team double strike until end of turn, and he attacks Derek with a 7/5 with double strike and trample. Derek takes 14, and Brad passes. Derek plays Elvish Rejuvenator, which lets him look at the top 5 cards of his library and put a land from among them into play tapped. He puts a forest into play from the ability, casts Kassaling Pride Mage, and passes. In his end step, Lobert uses Magnifying Glass again to draw and gain a life. Lobert untaps, plays a mountain, and a Burning Tree Vandal. He gains 1 off of Pristine Talisman, and chooses to have it enter with haste. He attacks Infamous Fridge with it. It triggers, he discards Reckless Worm, draws a card, and casts Reckless Worm for its madness cost. Infamous Fridge blocks the Vandal with a squirrel, which he sacrifices to Carrion Feeder. Nadir gets a +1/+1 counter from a token leaving play. In his second main phase, Lobert casts Valakut Invoker and passes. Infamous Fridge plays Gallant Cavalry, which puts a 2/2 Knight token with Vigilance into play. Next, he targets Nadir with Essence Infusion, which puts 2 +1/+1 counters on it and gives it lifelink until end of turn. He attacks Lobert with a 7/7 Carrion Feeder and a 6/6 Nadir with lifelink. Lobert blocks the Carrion Feeder with a 4/4 and takes 6 commander damage. Infamous Fridge gains 6 from the lifelink and calls it a turn. In his upkeep, Brad exiles a mountain to Tavern Brawler. He then draws for turn, plays the exiled mountain, and pays to draw off of Bonder's Ornament. He attacks Lobert with Gargadon, which Lobert does not block, so he takes 7. Brad ends his turn. Derek plays a tapped Wooded Ridgeline and pays 5 for his commander. He plays Tormod's Cryptkeeper and passes. In his end step, Lobert sacrifices Mindstone for a card. Lobert plays a snow-covered mountain and attacks Brad with a Burning Tree Vandal, which lets him discard a snow-covered mountain and draw a card. Brad chooses not to block and takes 2. After combat, Lobert plays Ulamog's Crusher and passes. Infamous Fridge untaps, plays a swamp, equips Skinwing to Nadir, and attacks Lobert with a 7/7 Carrion Feeder and a 6/6 Nadir with Flying. Before blocks, Lobert targets Skinwing with Smash, which destroys it and draws a card for Lobert. Infamous Fridge sacrifices his knight and both squirrels to Carrion Feeder to make it a 10/10. Nadir also gets 3 +1/+1 counters. Brad starts his turn by exiling a Plains to Tavern Brawler. He draws, plays a Plains, and plays Sky Shaper. He casts Otherworldly Journey to flicker his commander and put a +1/+1 counter on it. His team gets Double Strike again. He attacks Infamous Fridge with Gargadon and sacrifices Sky Shaper to give his team flying. He casts Burn Bright, which gives his team +2/+0 until end of turn. Infamous Fridge takes 18. Brad passes. Derek plays Lead the Stampede, which lets him look at the top 5 cards of his deck and put any creatures from among them into his hand. He finds Spirited Companion and Sylvan Ranger. He casts the Spirited Companion, which lets him draw a card. He plays a mountain and attacks Infamous Fridge with Brazen Upstart. Infamous Fridge takes the 4, putting him to 13 commander damage from Brazen Upstart. After combat, he plays Pillar Drop Rescuer, which puts Ambush Paratrooper into his hand from his graveyard. Lobert untaps for turn and attacks Infamous Fridge with Burning Tree Vandal, which allows him to discard a mountain and draw a card. Infamous Fridge takes the 2. In his second main phase, he casts Ardent Elementalist. He gains 1 off of Pristine Talisman. Ardent Elementalist targets Fiery Cannonade in Lobert's graveyard when it enters the battlefield. Derek sacrifices Tormod's Cryptkeeper to exile Lobert's graveyard in response. Next, Lobert casts the Haggle side of Merchant of the Veil, which lets him discard Fists of Flame and draw a card. He passes. Infamous Fridge starts his turn and plays Raise the Alarm, which makes 2 1/1 soldiers. He pays 1 to embalm his Sacred Cat, so he gets a 1/1 zombie cat token with lifelink. He attacks Lobert with a 10/10 Carrion Feeder and a 9/9 Nadir. Lobert blocks Nadir with Ardent Elementalist. Infamous Fridge sacrifices his 3 tokens to Carrion Feeder to give it 3 +1/+1 counters. Nadir gets 3 counters as well. He sacrifices Nadir to Carrion Feeder as well, which creates a number of 1/1 Elf Warrior tokens equal to its power, 12. He sacrifices 11 of the tokens to Carrion Feeder to make it a 25/25. Lobert is eliminated. Infamous Fridge ends his turn. Brad exiles another Plains to Tavern Brawler and draws for turn. He plays a mountain and casts Ondu Champion, a 4/2 ally that gives his team trample whenever it or another ally enters the battlefield. Brad kicks a Goblin Bushwhacker, which gives his team +1/+0 in haste. He attacks Infamous Fridge with Ondu Champion and Gargadon. Additionally, he attacks Derek with Goblin Bushwhacker. Derek takes 1 damage from Raid Bombardment. Infamous Fridge destroys Tavern Brawler with Exposed to Daylight and scries 1. Infamous Fridge is eliminated, and Derek takes 4. Brad passes. Derek attacks Brad with a 2/4 Conclave Phalanx, a 2/2 Pillar Drop Rescuer with Flying, and his 4/2 Commander. Brad blocks Brazen Upstart with Resolute Blademaster. Brad takes 4. Their commanders trade, and Brazen Upstart puts Inspiring Overseer into Derek's hand. After combat, Derek plays Inspiring Overseer, which draws him a card and gains him a life. He follows that up with a tapped Lorehold Campus and an Airlift Chaplain, which mills him for 3 and allows him to put a Plains or creature with mana value 3 or less from among the milled cards into his hand. If no cards are returned that way, it gets a +1/+1 counter. None of the milled cards qualify, so it gets a counter. Next, he casts Sylvan Ranger, which puts a Plains from his deck into his hand. Brad starts his turn and casts his commander for 7. His team gets Double Strike, and he plays Battle Screech to get 2 1/1 bird tokens with flying. Brad taps his commander and the 2 birds to flashback Battle Screech to get 2 more bird tokens. In his end step, Derek plays Ambush Paratrooper. Derek plays a Plains and attacks Brad with everything, 16 power. Brad blocks Inspiring Overseer with a bird and Conclave Phalanx with Gargadon. Derek activates Ambush Paratrooper twice, and Brad takes 28. Brad is eliminated, and Derek wins the game. Thank you for watching until the end. Please don't forget to check out the PDH Pod podcast, like, and subscribe.